Um, Shared this with a couple people, but to me it is very sad. And I think that I really have never felt this empty about something as external as what I'm about to talk about. But I thought I'd share it anyway because I think it's important uh, to understand. So, let's say the individual is born with a need to search for God, because the individual is born with a compulsion to understand what is unfathomable. Um, and yet, if that person were to assume that God is already located in him, in the reality of who he is, well, then it seems as though God loses the ability to be found. If we assume that he must search for it, which we do. This compulsion to search, unfortunately, keeps him from finding God because he does not expect God to be familiar, or at least to be as familiar as he finds himself. And yet, one does not find himself familiar. He is a ghost, and the sensation of something essentially alien to him is what he perceives God to be. So then this alien thing must be searched for and clarified, as it is to repeat that alien things often, at least, compel one to clarify, to find meaning, to figure out. We must do this in order to be comfortable with ourselves, in order to fix our own unique place in the universe. As I said, the search is ultimately fruitless because, simply put, it is unneeded and brings an individual farther from the truth. The truth, which that individual is condemned to feel for the rest of his life as alien and questionable. The search for God traps the individual in a paradox, because to an extent, I must say, we do understand ourselves, and tragically, we do not expect to understand God in the same way. How to remedy this? One cannot, because they look in the mirror and see themselves, rather than someone else. And what is God if not someone else? So it is if we are to take this grand assumption of all people as being God for what it is, we find that it is better not to search for this abstraction, because we find in the end that we are searching for ourselves, but ourselves in someone else. It is the attempt to fuse our own displaced feelings, our sense of otherness, with something that we can identify as clearly as we identify our own face. We gape dumbly in the mirror and see an individual who is not yet fully himself, because he has not yet understood that the God within himself is unfindable. It is in this sense of ourselves as fragments that we are able to see God as what it is. A fragment of ourselves, and thus never complete. So then God becomes a representation of what is lacking in our lives rather than a fully formed whole. In other words, we see ourselves as incomplete because we see God as complete, when in reality is the individual who is complete, and God who is merely a fragment of our denied greatness. This is unspeakably poignant to me. Because I just wanted to examine what people mean when they say that God is in me. You know, I'm not meant to find truth. I'm not trying to. What I'm trying to do is say, all right, we're alive because we're alive. But why does that make sense? all these assumptions that we have, you know, it is because it is. The universe exists because it exists. I think if you were to break it down, you'd understand why that makes sense to us, you know? So I'm not trying to figure out an answer when I spout this nonsense. What I'm trying to do is break down opinions that people have, not break down truths. Because, well, for one, opinions are easier to deal with. But I don't think I'm worthy of breaking down truths. Because I think most likely I'd end up coming out with something false. And great thinkers know how to break down truths and have each part exist as something true. Best I can hope for is to break down these opinions because they're not altogether true. So then, whatever I am able to find out, in turn, isn't altogether true. It's that idea of the between, you know? Between the answers. And I'm not saying between the lines. I'm not saying I'm reading between the lines and figuring out some great cosmic thing. I'm just trying to figure out where the margin is. When does something go from being true to false? What has to happen? And I think if I were to find that out, that'd be something. So, I just want you guys to think, you know? Think. Do something. There it is.